Thanks so much for coming. I'm Justin Fuhr. I'm a librarian at the University of Manitoba. I work at the Science Library. And this is a workshop entitled Power, Profit, and Privilege, Navigating Academic Publishing. So today we'll start out with just a brief introduction to academic publishing, kind of situate ourselves. Then we'll move into these different issues that you can find throughout academic publishing. So power, profit, privilege, 3 Ps, and then a couple more Ps. We got a plan for publishing, and then along with that, a plan for promoting your scholarly work as well. And I'll circulate that at the once we get finished talking about the first 3 Ps. So I just wanted to mention that this presentation was heavily inspired by, and much of the content is taken from, Amanda Makula's excellent book. So her book is entitled Power, Profit, and Privilege, Problematizing Scholarly Publishing. And I have the link there, and I will circulate the slides as well. Sorry, just one sec. Okay. Here, I'll pop the link in the chat if anyone wants to just follow along. There's you can click that bit.ly link, and then you can follow along with the slides if you'd like. Or you can just sit back. Okay, so introduction to academic publishing. So academic publishing, it's also called scholarly publishing. You'll notice that's the title of Amanda Makula's book, in the subtitle of the book. So scholarly publishing is a system or series of interactions through which academic writing or research is disseminated and consumed within scholarly communities. I like this definition. It's not just publishing like a book or a monograph or journal articles. There's a lot of different ways that academic publishing works. It's just those are the main ones. Those are the ones that we're most familiar with. Conference proceedings as well, or talking about your research at conferences as well, especially if it's published after the fact as well. I really like this life cycle. It was made by librarians at the University of Winnipeg, and it's been reused by all kinds of libraries. So this one actually Berkeley was using it, or UC Berkeley, and it just guides you through the whole process of publishing. So there's research life cycles where it focuses more on that first point, the creation aspect of it. Publishing is more about everything that kind of takes place after that, although that's still a main facet of academic publishing. So you create, right? You're creating something, you're researching, you have a research question, you go through all those steps, research life cycle, right? You're figuring out what methodology you're going to use, you're collecting data, you're analyzing that, right? But then what are you going to do? You're going to want to disseminate those results, right? Just like that definition we were just talking about. There's U of W puts, U of W library puts evaluating, right? So the project is reviewed for quality. So that's kind of like checking just to make sure the research is done in the proper way, right? But then you're going to be moving into the publication side of things. So you're going to be writing up your results. You're going to be looking for places to publish that work, present that work, get it out there, right? Let other people know what you found, and right? So they can read it. You can add to kind of this body of knowledge. And then once that process is done, and we'll talk more about that, then you're going to be disseminating it. People can access it in different ways. And then there's finally those last 2 steps, preservation and reading and reuse. Those are, not necessarily going to be covered in this presentation, but just so you know, those are kind of like the final steps after you've published something, after you've made something public for people to read, people to use in different ways, right? Maybe they cite it in their own work, that sort of thing. So we're mainly going to be talking about, well, evaluation, but really publication and then dissemination and access. So within that life cycle, there's all sorts of stakeholders in academic publishing. Some are more heavily involved in some of those steps than others, but there's many, many people that, either have a role to play or, are involved with the academic publishing process in some way. First, you have students, faculty, researchers. So these can be your authors. These can also be your readers, right? So people interacting with the work, people also creating their own work. You have universities or other institutions and organizations, including university administration. A lot of different pieces to that, a lot of parts working within that scholarly publication process, especially at the beginning of that life cycle, right? The creation of a project, a lot of people involved with that. Academic libraries. We have a big role to play. We do a lot of advocacy, hosting workshops like this. We also advise on specific pieces of the academic publishing process, which I'll talk about in a few minutes here. There's funders, right? They're providing financial backing for research to take place or to have research published as well. Publishers, big piece, big stakeholder. We'll talk a lot about those. A lot of different types of publishers. I just wrote down commercial. There's not-for-profit publishers. There's publishers that are also, an arm of scholarly societies or associations. A lot of different kinds. Editors, big role, right? They play a big role in deciding what is published, how it's published, right? If any changes need to be made, or if your work even comes out at all. And then, of course, peer reviewers too, which we'll talk a little bit about, right? They're, suggesting they're one of those kind of like gates you have to get through to get your work out there. Also, a lot of different types of peer reviewers as well, which we'll touch on. This too was from UC Berkeley. Okay, so we'll talk about scholarly journals. So one of the more common ways to get your work out there, right? An article published in a journal. So scholarly journals are typically narrow in focus, and they publish research in a very specific discipline or field, right? It's primary way for communicating scientific knowledge, right? You publish a journal article. This is also discipline dependent. So, certain fields or disciplines won't focus so much on journal articles, right? It'll be more slower publication process. Maybe they're publishing a book, for example. And articles are published regularly in scholarly journals. So they come out, monthly, quarterly, right? That sort of thing. And they typically go through rigorous peer review. Meryl Streep there. Okay. Now let's move into first aspect, right? Power. Imagine a researcher develops and completes a research project, right? Not too hard to imagine, I'm sure. The researcher then decides to report their findings in a scholarly publication. Where are they going to publish? Okay. They're going to publish in an academic journal. So enormous, gigantic commercial publishers own the majority of scholarly journals. Like big conglomerates like Sage, you may have heard some of these, Wiley Blackwell, Springer, Elsevier, Taylor and Francis, Wolters Kluwer, right? And commercial publishers sell academic work back to those who produced it in the first place. So when you're looking in the library search here at University of Manitoba, you're wanting to read an article, right? You want to, for whatever reason, right? Your advisor asks you to look something up, or you're teaching and you're considering to use something in a class, right? That article was paid for by the university for you to access it. Even if it's published by a University of Manitoba researcher, we had to buy that back. So over time, there's been an increasing commercialization of scholarly work, and it's only getting more commercialized, right? There's a lot of money to be made in publishing, scholarly publishing. So Discipline norms and traditional scholarly activities discourage publishing with not-for-profit publishers. So that's from Niles et al., published a couple of years ago. And there's increasing diversification of journals. So there's a wide range, right? Especially with, more things going online, more things entirely online, journals that are entirely hosted online. They don't produce a print version, right? There's a lot of open access software that makes that a lot easier nowadays. But researchers still have preference to publish in prestigious journals. And here's just a screenshot of, sorry, I'm just moving this out of the way here so I can read this. Here's a screenshot. This is from Journal Citation Reports. And that's a database of journal information, journal citation reports. It's owned and maintained by Clarivate. So Clarivate, one of these big commercial kind of really invested in academic publishing. And so they run the Web of Science database. And so in journal citation reports here, these are sorted by their journal impact factor. You can see at the top right, I don't know if it's really small on your screen, but at the top right, it says 2021 journal impact factor, right? And it's highest to lowest. And journal impact factor is one of the ways that people consider something prestigious or not. Journal impact factor, if you're at all interested, may not be, but if you're all interested in how they calculate it, it's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. They take the total citations that a journal receives from the past 2 years. So any article that's in there that's been cited somewhere else, right, over the past 2 years, and they'll divide that number by the total number of articles that have been published over those past 2 years, and they'll get a number. So you can kind of think of it as the average citation for an article that's been published in the last 2 years in that journal. And you may be familiar with some of these journals, right? These big ones, right? Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, number of nature serials there too, nature journals, British Medical Journal, right? These are journals that are getting huge amounts of citations. And then they get, higher journal impact factor. And once you know the term even, journal impact factor, you'll see it all over the place. If you go to any of these journals, they'll have probably a number. They'll have this number displayed on their website. And that, right, the British Medical Journal or, Lancet, maybe they don't care that much about, their journal impact factor, although I'm sure they do, but they probably don't care about that as much as maybe kind of like a mid-tier journal, right? And if they increase their journal impact factor, it just, in scholarly currency, prestige is a thing. So they're getting more articles, submitted to them. And in turn, right, they want this kind of highly cited research published in their journal and, right, increases the journal impact factor. We'll talk more about the term prestige in a couple minutes. Oops. Okay. So it's just a quote from librarian Claire Sewell. So to many in academia, formal publication is still seen as the gold standard of research outputs, and academics at any stage of their career are expected to accumulate publications on their CV, right? I'm sure that's not revolutionary to most of you. So review, tenure, promotion plays a huge role in academia, and career progression often depends on, right, getting tenure, getting promoted, right, having successful performance reviews, annual reviews, right? How do you make that more likely? Well, publish in prestigious journals, publish in journals, scholarly journals. Another aspect of power is what's called authorship agreements or copyright transfer agreements or author copyright agreement. So Amanda McCullough says the current system prioritizes sharing new knowledge with other academics and researchers rather than on making it available and accessible to those outside academia, the general public, right? So publishers often require authors. So I guess to put that in context, right? So people involved in academia, people that rely on RPT or review, promotion, tenure, right? They need to publish, and they're prioritizing publishing their work in these extremely expensive journals. That really, if you're not affiliated with an institution or an organization that can afford buying these things, right? It's kind of like a closed loop. You can't read it, can't get access to it. In addition, publishers often require authors to give copyright to the publisher, or maybe they retain copyright, but there's a number of stipulations on that. And that's what's called copyright transfer agreement. I don't want to spend too much time looking at this because, you don't need to know the ins and outs of like when you own something or when you don't, though it's important. You can look at this after in more detail if you'd like, but it really shows you the steps involved in publishing your work. And you can see that big imposing dashed line kind of 2/3 of the way over there. That's where you're transferring your copyright or not to the journal. And it's important to know there's all sorts of copyright agreements out there. Things that spell out whether your work is published online only, print only, both maybe, whether you're entitled to any royalties. It asks if you, the author, currently own the copyright, and you can't include typically any third-party copyrighted content in your work. It also stipulates whether you can deposit your work in institutional repository, which is a really fancy word for online database of work. So we have MSpace here at the U of M, where anyone, student, faculty, can deposit their work in MSpace, make it publicly accessible, right? And whether you can share your work with colleagues or your peers, whether you can host your work on your website, whether you can use that work in your teaching, and so on and so on. They can be really complicated too. And they're very, very common. So when you're publishing your work, make sure to read that copyright transfer agreement. It'll tell you what version of your work you can share publicly or not, right? And pieces of that you can negotiate. So it's not like you have to agree to everything that they spell out on there. Often you can negotiate pieces of it as well. Another piece to this power dynamic is open access. So open access, or you sometimes hear it called OA, theoretically it provides, and that's big, big air quotes, theoretically, it provides free and unrestricted access to the general public to scholarly work. OA fees, or open access fees, though, transfer the burden of subscription cost and publishing fees from the reader onto the author. Okay, and there's a lot of different types of open access, which I'll show you in a minute here, but that's really what is happening here. So instead of either, an individual, maybe general public, right, doesn't have access to institutional licenses or subscriptions and can't read, the latest article in the Lancet or something on Nature, right? It's expensive, very expensive. The author, right, can choose to publish it open access if whatever journal allows that. But really, it's just transferring the burden of subscription costs from reader to author. There's tons of different types of open access, though. And one of the best, in my opinion, is what's called diamond or platinum open access. That has no fees and no access charges. So not only is the author not having to pay, but the reader isn't having to pay either. But guess what? Most times, depends on your field, of course, not as prestigious, right? You're not going to see Nature not have any fees or access charges and allow anyone to read their materials. Not going to happen. There's also gold. So gold is what we're kind of talking about in the last slide, right? So gold makes something freely available online, but some or most publishers charge article processing charges, APCs. I shouldn't have capitalized that S in APCs, but article processing charges. So that is what I'm talking about, where the author is having to pay usually a fee in the thousands to make an article, make their work open access to everyone, but still publish in that journal. There's also journals that are hybrid. So these combine traditional subscription access and open access. So often often authors can choose to publish their work open access, paying a fee, or they can just publish traditionally, right? They can not pay a fee, but then that article or that work is not going to be available to the general public, only people who subscribe to that journal. And again, it's very expensive. What's becoming more common, though, is what's called green or, green open access. So green open access, researchers can do what's called self-archive their manuscript or their work in an institutional repository. And sometimes there's stipulations on whether you can just deposit it in any online repository or whether it has to be affiliated with your institution. And I wrote down this is becoming more standard because this will be an option even if you're publishing something traditionally, right? Submit something to, the Lancet, and they say, yep, pass peer review, you go through that whole process. They say, we're going to publish it. And I don't know for the Lancet specifically, but it's becoming more common where you can deposit what's called a preprint into your institutional repository. And so a preprint would be your work before it's gone through peer review. And it doesn't have kind of the journal layout, right? It doesn't have the peer review comments incorporated in your work, like you haven't changed it. It's basically what you would have submitted to the journal in the first place. There's also what's called black open access, not really a term that's used really, but just so you know, it's these like pirated articles, unauthorized publication of paywalled articles. So you can think of a site like Sci-Hub. That work is available to the public, but illegally. One other thing I'll mention about open access becoming more common if you receive tri-agency funding. So NSERC or SSHRC or CIHR funding, they'll stipulate that you have to make your work available open access, usually after 12 months. So you can publish traditionally, right, in a journal, that's fine, up to 12 months, and then you have to deposit, right, somewhere that's publicly available, right? U of M ZenSpace, for example. But some journal, it just really depends on that authorship agreement, that copyright transfer, that authorship agreement. It'll spell out when and what you can deposit in terms of your work to make it publicly accessible. Okay, I'm going to leave this up. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? It's a lot, like open access is, it's like simple, but it's also complicated. It's like a simple concept, but there's so many, it's very comprehensive. There's a lot of different pieces to it. That's where this infographic, there's a lot on here. Like I don't want to spend too long looking at it, but I just wanted to include it in case anyone's interested. There's a lot of different ways that this stuff interacts with your work, any work that you're producing and that you want to get published. And I just want to put a plug. Libraries is here to help with interpreting this kind of stuff. So we can advise on, what you're allowed to do, what you can't, right? Or maybe somewhere else to publish or negotiating that authorship agreement, that sort of thing. A lot of moving parts. Okay, so in terms of this section, in terms of power, think about who holds power or control of the scholarly publishing process. Think back to those stakeholders we were talking about. How do scholarly publishing power dynamics influence academia and academic culture, right? Prestigious journals, open access. What's included in your author agreement? That's really important. Don't skip that step. For sure, read it. If you have any questions, contact the library. We're happy to help. And if you're publishing open access, what type of open access are you talking about? Because, right, It's an all-encompassing term, but there's many different types. Okay, so moving from power into profit. These are linked in a lot of ways. I'll show you how. So imagine, let's say you're responsible for spending the university's money to purchase scholarly and academic publications for faculty and students. How far do you think $10,000 would get you? You don't have to answer, it's a rhetorical question. $100,000. $1 million? $10 million. $10 million is probably closest to what it is in reality here at the U of M. You need to realize that academic publishing production costs are very low. They're low. Research is conducted by the researchers and not the journal, right? The journal doesn't have, a team of researchers it employs putting out scholarly content, publishing in the journal. The research is conducted by, your peers, right? And not only that, online content is significantly cheaper to produce than print. And totally depends on the journal. We were talking about format before. Some are solely online. Some are online and in print. Some may have a print copy, but not a lot of people subscribe to that or get it physical copy in print, and they read or do most of their reading online. Just going to check the chat. Probably not as far as I think. Exactly. It's definitely not. Many of you would be very surprised. Okay, profit and prestige. So this is what I was talking about before, where faculty and researchers, scientists, have a currency of prestige, and that word prestige can mean a lot of things. And one way academics measure prestige is high metrics. So we're talking about things like journal metrics, what we were talking about before, journal impact factor, author metrics. So how many citations does someone have, right? You may have heard of someone's H index. That's what we're talking about with author metrics. It's also alt metrics. It basically, stands for alternative metrics. And it's just another way of measuring what you would call prestige. It includes things like, it's more comprehensive though. It includes things like social media mentions or news mentions, news article or news outlet mentions, or they even have a scale of how much it's affected government policy too. And there's article metrics as well. So how many citations does a specific article receive? And that can be very important for some academics. It can be very important for journals as well. So think about our discussion before about review, promotion, and tenure. Having highly cited work can be extremely valuable for many academics. So think about how profit motivations affect your scholarly work, if at all. Have you ever thought about research metrics associated with your work, right? Why and how are they important to you? And really think about how profit and power intersect, especially with this idea of profit in prestige, right? It's kind of like a scholarly currency, like I was talking about before. Privilege, final P. So Bates and Ng write that the majority of North American academics are white, right? They published 2 years ago. And in their article, they argue it's only through dialogue, speaking with people, communicating in different ways, that real change can occur in both what they call mindsets or ways of thinking and procedure or ways of doing. That's their terms. And just think about the word institution. I've said it a number of times in the presentation so far. So for me, it reminds me of tradition and custom And these are the types of things you need to break free of in terms of traditional ways of measuring your work as an academic and as a researcher, as a student, as a teacher. It can be very difficult and challenging, but it shouldn't have to be. And in terms of academic publishing, white privilege plays a huge role in so many of the decisions and factors that affect whether your work is published where you want it to be published or even published at all. And you can see in this figure, it's been modified by librarian Rowe in 2020. You can see how many of the different stages white privilege plays a role. And this really leads to a lack of diversity in content, a lack of diversity in terms of methodology or methods. It also prioritizes and biases certain viewpoints and perspectives, especially those that are white, especially those that are male as well, right? So you can see, right, you submit an abstract, editor takes a look, decides whether it's even worth reviewing, sending out for a review, privilege. Then work gets sent out to reviewers, right? Now suddenly your peers, fellow academics, they're deciding whether it's good, whether it needs revision, or whether it's no good. It's just rejected from the journal. Then white privilege, right? The journal tells you whether your work is accepted, right? The journal gets to decide as well after that, after peer reviewers look at it, whether it gets published. And then finally, librarians, right? We're selecting, we're purchasing, we're cataloging, we're circulating, we're also deciding whether something is kept or whether something is discarded, or, you know, whether it's outdated for whatever reason, or, you know, needs space in the library and we're getting rid of it, right? Or maybe it's financial too, right? Remember, in terms of profit, extremely expensive to subscribe to many of the resources that we have. It's also gender inequities, right? And you can see this throughout the academic publishing process. So this is an article published by Nicole Eva, Malin Lay, John Sharif in their article, or it's entitled Less Money, Less Children, Less Prestige. Differences between male and female academic librarians. So it came out about 1.5 years ago, and they write, in addition to white privilege, there exists systemic gender bias. Women are underrepresented consistently and worldwide throughout scholarly communications process, from authoring articles to serving as journal editors and peer reviewers. And they continue to say, moreover, when women in science do serve as authors, they face challenges to their contributions and its value, with their work often going unrecognized or unrewarded. And in turn, these problems hamper future research opportunities and career advancement in the academy and perpetuate an unfair system in which women's scientific labor is devalued. And they conclude by saying, well, in this section, they conclude by saying, ultimately, gender bias interferes with the production of new knowledge. But, right, what do you do? Well, Eva, Lay, and Sharif, they write, as for solutions, many have already been suggested in library literature and also beyond, but right, things like mentorship, leadership programs, extended leaves when you have a child, right? Conference-supported childcare, workplace flexibility. There's also things like library administrators, or, I mean, you can apply this across academia, administrators, right? Things like being able to work from home, making bias training required for internal and external hiring, promotion, performance reviews, and include gender as a discussion topic, right? And then they also say neutral, like there's been research into, they have a citation there, but research has shown that gender neutral strategies aren't the solution, since they end up often favoring men, but so rather strategies to be implemented that protect and promote women in pipeline, right? And they also, they include a appendix or accompanying document that talks about different resources and research that's on this topic, right? Not doing gender neutral strategies, but rather promoting women in academic pipeline. And if that wasn't enough, right, there's also a global inequity. Global inequities. So scholarly publications are predominantly written in English. Amanda McCullough writes, research shows that the current system of scholarly knowledge production privileges scholars and authors in the global north over those from the global south in a variety of ways. So she writes, for example, articles by Southern academics are cited at a lower rate than their Northern counterparts. Southern journals are underrepresented in leading journal index tools such as Scopus and Web of Science. And sorry, she has a lot of examples. I don't know if I want to read them all out, but knowledge is assumed to flow from north to south, with the global north the predominant knowledge creator and the global south its passive recipient, right? The good news is, especially with academic content being hosted online more and more increasingly, there's a number of different resources, different repositories, right? Like I was saying, repositories, basically like an electronic database, right, that hosts scholarly work that are popping up that prioritize what McCullough calls the global south, right? So there's things like the Latindex. So that's a portal into scholarship and research produced in Latin America, the Caribbean, Spain, and Portugal. It's also what's called SciELO, and that's Brazilian electronic database that provides open access to journals and articles, and things like Open Research Africa. So this is a revolutionary form of scholarly publishing. It bypasses the journal model altogether, and it emphasizes rapid publication, transparency of peer review, and continual revision. You can see these sorts of things also, right, in whether you want to call it the global north or global west, right, with things like archive. So academics can post preprint of their work, and sometimes that's what they do, right? They post a preprint, doesn't go through peer review, maybe it doesn't at all, or maybe it's just before it's gone through peer review. It's not published in the same sort of way, right? It can be, but maybe it's not. And the researchers are more interested in getting their research out there rather than having an article published in one of these prestigious journals, right? So think about your voice within academia and the voices of others within academia. How is your voice privileged? How is your voice disadvantaged? And how can you work to amplify disadvantaged voices? Just to think about. So our 3 Ps, right? Power, profit, privilege. Why does it matter? Want to be aware of how academic publishing is problematized? You want to make intentional, informed choices on how and where to publish your work. You worked hard on it, right? And introduce incremental concrete action to challenge power, profit, and privilege in academic publishing and in academia more generally. Okay, so that's our 3 Ps. We got another 3 Ps, create a plan for publishing and promotion. I'm going to post the link in here so you guys have it. Okay. Another bit.ly link coming at you. Okay, so you can click on that. It'll open up a Word doc. And the first 2 pages are on this publishing plan. So I'll open it in a second here. But it just gets you to think about different pieces of once you have kind of a work, or maybe you're not even at the publishing stage yet, but you're just kind of thinking about mulling over where you want to publish or what you want to do with it, right? Maybe you're thinking about whether like a research project has multiple articles associated with it, or you're going to be presenting it somewhere and then publishing it later, that sort of thing. It just gets you to think about some of the stuff we were talking about in this presentation. I also included 5 resources that basically they're lists of journals, and they're organized in a lot of really helpful ways. One of them actually, Master Journalist, that second bullet point there, is really great to, once you have, well, it's run by Clarivate, same company that runs journal citation reports in the Web of Science, but it has a feature called Manuscript Matcher, so you can upload an abstract of your work. It'll, use keywords in that abstract to give you a list of journals that you may be relevant, or maybe good venue for you to publish with, right? But there's other ones too. EDAN's Journal Selector, Journal Guide, Directory of Open Access Journals, or DOAJ. These are all great. They're basically just set up in different ways. They have different lists of journals, and that can just get you started on whether you're just starting a project or whether you're at the publishing stage, right? And it can give you an idea of where you want to promote your work. You can see more of the, prestigious quote unquote journals in your discipline or field, right? Or you can get a list of more, journals with open access options. Maybe you're thinking about green open access. Maybe you're thinking about gold open access. Maybe you got funding in a grant specifically for open access fees or article processing charges, right? And you can use that money to, put your work on, like PLOS, for example, Public Library of Science, right? I think it's about just over $2,000 to publish open access there for us here in Canada. So, right, you can use that money, publish open access. I'll just pop open. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Okay, so can everyone see this, actually? I think so. Anyways, this is the document, just the table. You don't have to go through all of this, right? Sometimes I'm looking at these sorts of things like I'm busy, don't have the time to really type everything out, but it just gets you to think about these different aspects, right? What kind of research metrics does a journal have? You can often see what a journal will have in terms of copyright and author rights retention and agreements, right on their website. And you could just make a couple notes, right? I'm allowed to post a preprint. Okay, well, great. You can post a preprint in, U of M's MSpace, for example. I'll just make a note also that U of M, our institutional repository MSpace, that those documents gets picked up by Google Scholar. So it makes it more accessible as well in terms of that. It gets indexed in Google Scholar so people can find it when they're searching Google Scholar. They can also find it when they're just Googling too. And it also gets added to your Google Scholar profile if you have one of those set up. And then if you have any confusion over what these terms mean, I just wrote down, most of this is from Amanda McCullough's book, I should say. But I just wrote down kind of what questions you should ask yourself or what you should be thinking about for each of these aspects when you're publishing, if you want to spend the time to think about this sort of stuff. Oh yeah, so I said I was going to talk about peer review. So most journals are peer reviewed in some way. Some have, well, a lot have 2 peer reviewers, right? And then there's also the editor involved or associate editor making decisions on people's work, what kind of changes need to be made. There's the traditional way peer review is with a double blind. So you as the author don't know who's reviewing your work and sending you feedback, and the peer reviewer doesn't know who's the author of the work. No one knows, right? There's also something called open peer review, which is gaining traction with certain journals. That makes everything open. So you know who the peer reviewers are, and the peer reviewers know who the author is. It's just a different way of doing it. So there's that. Actually, it's the first 3 pages, and you can use these links to find find journals that are relevant to you. Also, if you have any questions about that, finding a place to publish, be sure to contact us. The library is happy to help with that. So there's that. I don't know if people want to fill that out now, but I just want to show you also this promotion plan. So it goes back to that University of Winnipeg Library life cycle that I showed at the very beginning. So not only do you want to get your work out there, but you also want to promote it, right? To have people read it. And maybe you want to put a lot of thought into this. Maybe you don't want to put any thought into this. Up to you. But I just have a couple questions that you can think about, right? How you want to kind of promote or frame your research. And then there's also a number of resources at the bottom here. If any of these are all helpful to you, there's a couple on writing, basically research explainers or summaries of research summaries that appeal to the general public. And there's a number of different venues you can publish those in kind of alongside your research. And then there's also a number of resources on promoting your research using social media as well. So that's the guide, that's the plan, publishing and promotion. I'll leave those with you. The link's in the chat there. If there's any questions, if you want to fill it out, I can always stick around, answer any questions you guys have. Maybe look through some of these journal lists if that's at all appealing to you. I'm not sure. No one's saying anything, so I'm not sure. This is just on the promotion plan. So it starts on page 4. You can create a promotion plan, promote your scholarly work in any way, right? If you have any questions about any of this, write the plan or anything about the presentation that we covered, be sure to get in contact with me. Love to answer your questions. And I wanted to, as you're filling that out or not, I wanted to cover some helpful resources. If you want to do any reading about this topic, there's a lot to dig through. That bullet point at the very bottom, the U of M Libraries one, that one's really useful, talking about open access publishing. We have a number of waivers that we have access to for students and faculty looking to publish. So sometimes those open access fees, they're either free or they'll be discounted heavily. Just depends on which specific journal you're talking about. So we can guide you through those if you have any questions. And don't forget that we're here to help answer questions about this, about really anything about your research. If you have questions on where or how to publish, and especially if you have any questions about those copyright agreements, author copyright agreements, get in touch with us. Contact the library. You can contact the email on that open access publishing page, research services, library research services. Happy to help you navigate any of those or give you any advice on, right, or answer any of your questions, big or small. And these are just some of the sources I looked through to make the presentation and image credits. And then I did want to highlight this too, bibliography. There's a number of sources here that you can take the time to read through if you're really interested in this topic, right? Or if you have any sources that you have read that you think would fit in something like this, right? Talking about power, talking about profit, right? Get in contact. Love to hear from you. Great. Thank you. Thanks, Brett. Yeah. Have a great day, everyone.